Okay, so we are here. We are so grateful to have Kaysee Cooper with us, a licensed marriage family therapist. I had the pleasure of hearing Kaysee speak at a conference last year in San Diego, and she was amazing, so I thought it would be really valuable to bring her here with all the families for St. Kilian. She is currently working in a private practice at OC Counseling here in Tustin and Mission Viejo. Kaysee earned her bachelor's degree in psychology at UCLA and her degree in clinical psychology at Vanguard. Kaysee grew up in Southern California and is currently working with teens, individuals, couples, families in private practice. Kaysee provides education and support in the local community, speaking at events and groups such as ours, which have included the topics of social media, use with teens, psychoeducation, anxiety, depression, and ADHD. So we are so thrilled to have Kaysee here with us today. So let's give her a big welcome.
Thank you so much. Let me get situated real quick. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me make sure this is good. How's everyone doing today? Good. Thanks for joining me. Okay, like it was mentioned, my name is Kaysee Cooper. I'm just going to take this off. My name is Kaysee Cooper, and I am a licensed marriage and family therapist here in the Orange County area, and ironically enough, thanks to screens, virtually in California. So I also do what's called performance mindset work as well, which is looking at the mindset of an athlete. And so we help athletes from high school all the way to the professional level, actually across the country, looking at the mental game, how to win the sport mentally. So, and we believe that through you get to mental toughness through emotional wellness, right? So it's super awesome what I get to do and sit with every single day, being a therapist or a performance mindset coach. And oftentimes when I have the opportunity and the privilege to speak in front of a group such as your own, I start off by saying that title of marriage and family therapist can be an extremely misleading title because you don't really have to work with marriages or families to be a marriage and family therapist. I primarily work with individuals, the majority of them being kids, teens, and young adults, which inevitably involves incorporating the family structure at some level, such as you parents. And with that, I constantly work alongside a population where screens are both a primary stressor and a prevalent conversation for both the client and the family alike. So with that, I am just so humbled and honored to be here to speak on something that not only am I passionate about and is not only relevant but also prevalent to each and every one of us here today. I'd probably argue that literally every single person sitting in here probably has a screen on them of some sort. I used a screen to literally get into this exact room today, and many of you will have to check your screens by the time this message is done. So with that being said, I invite each and every one of us in here today to just be graceful and compassionate with ourselves as truth is revealed in this topic. Literally, let's take a deep breath because they can actually be a heavy topic and may trigger feelings of guilt, especially for parents. So I will answer these questions now. No, it's not too late to change. No, it's never too early to be informed. No, you did not ruin your kid by giving them an iPhone or a PlayStation. And most importantly, yes, there is still hope. So with that, there's so much to get through and so little time. So let me jump right in with a little video to get us started. And hopefully technology will work.
Daddy and I are making some changes so that we can be happier and healthier. And we're starting with this meal that I prepared.
I think it looks great.
Doesn't it look good?
What is that, grilled cheeses?
No, baked tofu.
Oh.
It's actually really tasty. And the lettuce is so fresh and tasty that you forget how good lettuce tastes on its own without dressing.
No, dressing always gets in the way of the natural taste of the lettuce. Yeah.
And another thing we've decided is to cut back on all of the electronics we use. Basically, what we're gonna do is get rid of the Wi-Fi and only use the computer
What?
from 8 to 8:30 at night.
How are we gonna go on the computer?
We're going to have a hard line in the kitchen.
Yeah, we'll supervise that.
You can't do this. You can't take away the Wi-Fi.
No Wi-Fi! Ha ha ha! You don't spend enough time with the family when you're constantly on your iPhone and your computer, and you're only here for 5 more years.
So you won't see me after 5 years?
No, but you won't be living with us. And you should get to know your little sister.
You've got the perfect friend right here.
I don't want to be friends with her now. I'll be friends with her when she's 20 and a normal person.
I don't want to hang out with her when I'm in my 20s.
You're on the computer too much as it is. You need to get outside more. Do some playing outside.
Yeah, you can build things out. You could build a fort outside.
What?
Yeah, build a fort. Play with your friends and have
Make a fort outside?
Yeah.
And do what?
Have little.
Do what in the fort?
When I was a kid, we used to build tree houses and play with sticks.
Nobody plays with sticks.
You and Charlotte can have a lemonade stand.
Play kick the can.
Look for dead bodies.
It's fun. That's fun to do.
Get a tire and then just take a stick and run down a street with it.
Nobody does that crap. It's 2012.
You don't need technology.
No technology.
Charlotte, put that down.
I don't need to be monitored all the time on the computer. I don't do anything bad.
Nobody said you were bad.
I don't do things I'm not supposed to. I don't illegally download music. I don't look at porn like Wendy.
She is up to no good. She's not allowed to come over here anymore.
What's porn?
No, she said corn.
This isn't turning out the way I wanted it to.
I'm not hungry.
No computer.
Listen to your mom.
I need to use it for my homework.
She's outplaying us.
I know. She's tough.
So I'm sure some relatable laughter in the audience, but I always think that's just a cute and comedic way to start, again, a topic that can sometimes be a little bit heavier as we go through this research. And so my goal in being here with you guys today is that in hopes of having our kids live a full life, our goal is to have our children seek to follow God rather than seeking to gain followers. If Jesus had social media, he'd likely be following one person and would have 12 followers, and look at the influence he still has. So my goal, therefore, is to provide you with some studies, some stats, and steps to help our children live closer to that message. And we'll start here in 1 John chapter 2, verses 15 through 17. It reads, "Do not love the world or anything in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For what the world values, the lust for constant pleasure, the greed for more things, and the prideful positioning to appear important. None of these things come from your Father. The world and what it values is going to pass away, but whoever does the will of God will live forever." We are being called to answer whether we want to be a people pleaser or a God pleaser. Are you going to go with God's value system or the world's value system? One that is saturated in screens and the value they provide rather than the value he provides. So in order to touch the surface on screens, we are going to go fast. I was thinking just how fast technology changes, where 2 years ago what I presented on isn't relevant today, and probably when I am done speaking here, this whole talk will be outdated. Totally kidding. It's still going to be relevant. But this is just how fast media and screens are changing today, and I will try and cover this information just as fast. However, there's just so much to cover when it comes to screens that there's really no way I can cover it all. But have no fear. We have created what's called a Parent's Guide to Screen. If you go to www.theresetgroup.com/free, there's going to be an all-inclusive guide for parents to navigate specific platforms, as well as recommendations for screen usage for your families. So there's going to be help for Androids, help for Apple, and then again, all the different platforms, recommendations, how to change the settings. We recruit our Gen Zers to help us out in this because they are much younger and also much cooler than I am. So they have helped us, and it's really all-inclusive. It's there to download for free. Use it yourself, share it with a friend. That's all for you guys. Theresetgroup.com/free. So if you do have questions, I ask that you hold on to them, write them down. If there's time, I will get to them in a group setting. Otherwise, I will make myself available if people just need to come up at the end. I'm totally open to that. So let's dive right in. So this quote, "Our youth now love luxury. They have bad manners, no regard for authority. They show disrespect for their elders and love chatter in place of exercise. They no longer rise when elders enter the room. They contradict their parents, chatter before company, gobble up their food, and terrorize their teachers." That sounds like my waiting room on any given day. But the quote in and of itself did not hold much shock or insight to me, as again, it felt very common knowledge, especially in doing what I do. However, what was shocking was the time in which this was spoken. This was actually from Socrates, 400 BC. So, in many ways, our youth have not changed, but our culture and our climate has. Again, in looking at our culture and the current climate, my goal is to not be an alarmist. It's not to make you feel hopeless, but to just build awareness. My goal is to educate you, equip you, and encourage you. So let's dive in with some fun, or maybe not so fun, but definitely relevant facts. And these are from Homeland Security, which assesses all cyber crimes, as well as Vanguard University, who does extensive research in sex trafficking. So 53% of American children have a smartphone by age 11. 89% of minors have a smartphone by age 16. And most report feeling safer because they have a phone. And in some ways, that's totally true. The phone in and of itself is not a bad thing. It's what we do with the phone. It's the long-term effects that we're going to see that are concerning. A quick story here. Adam Atler, he's the author of a book, Irresistible. So again, that book's called Irresistible by Adam Atler. Phenomenal content in there. But what he did is he interviewed major innovators, such as Steve Jobs, even Spiegel, and he is the creator of Snapchat. And he discovered something that that all of these innovators had in common that was actually really interesting. They had not provided their kids with phones, not due to carelessness of their children's safety, but rather long-term safety of their children's brains. And so the innovators of technology in some of the world's most utilized apps follow a drug dealer's cardinal rule: don't get high on your own supply. So these big guys that are doing the research, and they're so brilliant, they're not providing their own children with their inventions for these reasons. 90% of teenagers ages 13 to 17 have social media or have used social media. 82% of predators study social media likes, dislikes, and routines. Another quick story, I was working with a young girl, middle school aged, and I go out into the waiting room, and she is having a full-blown breakdown. And I'm like, what could be going on here? So I take her back into the office, and she's just in tears, and she's like, my mom's taking away Quora. Before I could even ask what Quora is or what even that means, she quickly said, I only told one person my age, and it was because he told me first. I was like, okay, let's slow it down. What's going on? She told me Quora is this website/app that seems, I guess, innocent. You kind of type in a question, and then people can pose an answer, and someone else can type in a question. You can pose an answer. We can see how quickly that could go south. But anyways, she's just in tears. Like, I never told anyone my name. And again, I only told one person my age, and it's because he told me first. And okay, let's breathe. Tell me a little bit more about like this app, right? Or this website. And she's telling me, again, you ask questions. Okay, what kind of questions were you asking? And then she has a smile and she goes, well, you know me, I love animals. So I was asking like, which dogs are the fluffiest? And if you had to get a first-time dog, like which kind would you be? And all of these questions. And I'm like, okay, yeah, totally innocent content, right? And I'm like, out of curiosity, what was your like username? And again, big smile on her face, and she's like, you'll think this is funny. It was a play off of a character on a TV show she's watching, and she was like, that's super creative, huh? And I'm like, yeah. And so then I was like, okay, and then like, when do you log on to this app? And she's like, only after school for like an hour, and then I start doing my homework. And I was like, oh, okay. So I was like, tell me again what that TV show was that you based your screen name on? She tells it to me. I type it into Google and look for targeted audience, right? Preteens and teenagers, right? So it was looking at like 10 to 15, right? And I was like, okay, so right now I kind of have you in a 5-year gap just based off of that alone. And then I was like, and then you told me that you're going on after school. Okay, so that's like what, 3:30 to 4:30. Again, that's gonna fill into a gap of probably middle school to elementary school age. And then the questions you're asking me, I'm gonna guess you're closer to the 10-year-old than you are the 15-year-old. So without you even saying anything, I could very quickly figure out a range and at least how old you are based on just your screen name, what you're asking, and what time you're logging in. Her eyes got really big, and all of a sudden, it kind of made sense. So again, 82% of predators are studying social media likes, dislikes, and routines just how I described. Eight to 12-year-olds average just under 5 hours of screen media a day, and teens view about 7.5 hours. And this is not including time for homework. That's essentially a whole shift at work. Since 2015, the percentage of young people who report watching online videos every day has doubled. The word porn is the 4th most searched word by kids under the age of 7. We hit our 1 billionth website a few years ago. 1/3 of them are porn. Approximately 3 billion people worldwide play video games. 60% of gamers played online more frequently during the pandemic. In 2019, the World Health Organization recognized gaming disorder as a mental health condition. 90 to 99% of all American children play video games, and the prevalence of gaming addiction has increased as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. So what's the point of all of these stats besides scaring everyone in the room? As parents, we are at a point in our culture where we have to choose to collide with screens. We really can no longer just give and let go and play the game of reactionary and wait until trouble is revealed, because there are a lot of active and alluring enemies that can be very appealing to our kids and lead them to follow the values of the world rather than the values of God as described in the scripture. So let's get into screens generally, and then I'm gonna break it down more specifically to social media and video games, because those are usually our big players. So what we're seeing in psychology is what we call a reverse iceberg effect. And so what before, the tip of the iceberg was social media. It was the highlight reel, and what reality was the base, left uncovered, left unseen. But now social media is becoming the base, and what we see in real life is just the tip. The 2D world is taking over the development of who they are. Therefore, now what we see of someone online is their diary, their TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat. It's telling us the real story of who they are instead of just the tip. It's replacing the necessary skill of learning the hard social work of navigating face-to-face interactions. Social media has completely shaped the brains of the younger people I work with. One thing I have to be mindful of in session is this. I could spend 5 or 10 minutes in a conversation with a young person about a conflict they have had with a girlfriend, a boyfriend, a friend. When I remember to ask whether this conversation happened over text, phone, social media, face-to-face, and more often the answer is text or social media. Yet in the telling of this story, that isn't apparent to me. I always stop and reflect that the client doesn't differentiate the various modes of communication the way I do, and the result is a landscape filled with disconnection and addiction. And so, why are we seeing this? And it says the needs of every teen. The reason teen is right there is just because a lot of the research in this has to do with the teenage population because they're the most impacted. However, it's good to know, again, even if you have little ones, let's be proactive rather than reactive. So again, in the research, why are we seeing this? It's because every teen has 2 basic needs: the need to belong and the need to be independent. Screens give them both. So specifically, girls are motivated by being well-liked and well thought of. Instant gratification, they get on screens, likes, comments, reposts. Boys, they're motivated by being in charge of themselves, being in control of themselves. I have the power. Video games give them the power. And when you threaten to take away that power by taking away the game, well, now you're in a power struggle that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. That's the first reason. The second reason is physiological. For the readers in the room, again, I'm going to bring up Irresistible by Adam Atler. Another great one is Digital Invasion by Dr. Hart. So what they do, they both in their own ways do a ton of research around this stuff. And so, again, the second reason this is going to be a physiological, biological reason. Steve Jobs, the genius that he is, he sought out and asked the question, what is the youngest age a kid can be addicted behaviorally? Research showed it was as early as 6 months. So then they started doing more studies, right? And they started with pictures, and they showed a picture, and then they'd remove them, observing the reactions. Then they moved into shapes, and finally to blocks, all working to observe where the strongest reaction was. And you know what Adam found? That the shape kids become most behaviorally addicted to, let me grab mine, looked exactly like this. And this is what Jobs needed to make his phone look like. That's my cute dog. But that's exactly why Steve Jobs changed the whole game when he created the iPhone. For those of you who remember, phones did not look like the iPhone before. This was based in research. It showed that it was the strongest reaction, insert addiction. They discovered that this shape released a tranquil neurotransmitter in the brain, which is what creates or stimulates our society's screen addiction. And out of this, they also discovered certain populations that are more bent towards screens. ADHD, learning disabilities, those who don't do well or find worth in academics. Why? Addictions aren't driven by substances or behaviors, but by the idea learned across time that they protect addicts from psychological distress. It isn't the body falling in unrequited love with a dangerous drug, but rather the mind learning to associate any substance, or in this case behavior, with relief from psychological pain or discomfort. And screens do just that. Side note here, think about this. It's, matter of fact, to be good at a game, you need to be distracted to survive. Distractibility is actually rewarded. Therefore, ADHD kiddos gravitate to video games because their distractibility is rewarded, and the more time they spend with video games, the more likely they are to develop difficulties maintaining sustained concentration on a single item. This is why this population is one of the most threatened. Think of it this way. We are the most connected generation and yet the most loneliest generation ever. We are the most socialized generation, and yet we have the most social anxiety and social phobias in the history of our country. But why? Social media overactivates the reptilian part of our brain. Reptilian part, think fight or flight. That alarm system in your brain, social media overactivates that part of the brain. Not the limbic system. The limbic system is our relational part of the brain. So yes, kids, I know you're not in here, but yes, kids, online friends and relationships are therefore different than in person according to the brain. Meaning the survival part of the brain is just saying, I need more to survive. What is missing in me that I need to survive? It's a constant alarm going off, leading to anger, fear, anxiety, aggression, and deficit thinking. What's the byproduct of this? The American Journal of Public Health has found a direct correlation with an increase of social media use and suicide ideation. In 2020, there was an estimated 1.2 million suicide attempts. In 2020, we also broke the records for the most time spent on screens due to the effects of the pandemic. Really sadly, too, at the end of last year, at the end of 2022, a coroner actually ruled death by suicide as related to social media for the first time ever. Studies from Harvard and public health have reported that social media increases feelings of anxiety, depression, loneliness, and poor body image among individuals ages 14 to 24. These kids are being exposed to more people in minutes than they were ever intended to in their whole entire lives, which has created unrealistic standards they define themselves against. They're just scrolling on TikTok, and again, they're seeing more people in minutes than they were ever supposed to see in the entirety of their lifetime. The top 3 words searched past 9 p.m. on Google: porn, suicide, loneliness. So the phones need to be put away at night, to put simply. But what is the result of this? It's for girls, it doesn't create a peaceful brain, but an anxious one. It doesn't create a happy brain, but a depressed one. It doesn't create a content brain, but a dissatisfied brain that screams, I need to change. I am not good enough. Who I am as God created me is not valuable. Social media grooms them on what to wear and what to be. And the real result for boys is a narcissistic brain. It's been driven by power. It has an inability to empathize, to comfort, to celebrate others, because they're seeing others as objects and not people. There is no jump right now from boyhood to manhood. And of course, both genders can experience either based on their exposures. However, this is what gender-based research has defined and supported. So at this point, I'm sure you're like, we get it, Kaysee, it's bad. But it poses the question, if it is so bad, then why is it so addicting? It creates what social psychologists call a social validation cycle. So social validation compels us to change our behaviors, our attitudes, and our actions, even when what we observe doesn't really match our true feelings, style, and thoughts. We go against our better judgment because we want to be liked and accepted and found in agreement with others. And when we are validated, we continue to engage in what creates that validation. When we feel seen, we continue to engage in what creates us feeling seen. We are using the behaviors of others as a guide in establishing the standard for the choices and decisions we make. Biologically, what does this look like? When the hypothalamus, which is your body's control coordinating center, is flooded with dopamine, that's that feel-good hormone, it activates the part of the brain that is triggered in addiction. And we begin to feel we need more in order to feel whole or right. And so the dopamine system is most powerfully stimulated when the information coming in is small and limited so that it doesn't fully satisfy. And that's why social media was created this way. Snapchat, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, these give small doses that send your dopamine system raging with an I need more message, leading to behavioral addiction. And it happens quick. Just 10 minutes on social media can raise oxytocin levels in the blood by 13%. It takes 20 minutes of petting a dog to get that same result. So pet your dog and scroll on your screen. Totally kidding. But it creates feelings of trust and security and reduces anxiety levels short term, but this leads to addiction because it creates that chase for a high. So what this does, again, it leads to an emotional foothold. This is a military term that when a small part of a territory, when taken over, it controls the whole country. So it takes an emotional foothold. When a small part of our brain or a small part of our life takes over, it controls our whole being. And it leads to an emotional stronghold. It depletes me emotionally, harms me relationally, attacks me mentally, and it ultimately destroys me existentially or spiritually. And in Matthew chapter 6, verse 1, it reads, "Be careful. Don't do your acts of righteousness publicly to be admired by others. If you do, you will lose your reward from your Father in heaven." When you show off, it builds barriers, not fellowship, which leads to depletion. We are so wary to let our phones or screens' battery be depleted, but don't recognize when our own internal battery is showing the same warning signs. We need to work to recharge through fellowship and relationship, not deplete through screenship. And so with this, I want to hop over quickly to video games a little bit more specifically. So video games, they're all the fun of war without the consequences and the responsibility. There is no risk, but much reward. I included some research notes on the screen here, but for time's sake, I want to highlight one, which is Dr. Andrew Doan. He's the head of addiction research for the Pentagon in the US Navy. Smart guy. He's been researching video game addiction, and he actually made it part of the military application process to research individuals that engage with video games and evaluate their brain scans. And what he found was the neural mapping, so the picture of the brain, was similar to that of a person on opioids. That's heroin. They concluded that video games and screen technologies act as a digital drug. It acts like a Schedule II drug, a narcotic on the brain. And they discovered that those applicants that exhibited that neural mapping had difficulty submitting to authority. And additional studies have supported this, finding that teens who spend more than 2 hours a day playing games get into more fights and arguments with authority than do their peers who don't. These are characteristics that lead to what we call antisocial personality disorder, which is a person who has a disregard for and violation of the rights of others, which other tremendous research reported the evidence linking video games to antisocial behavior is as strong as the evidence linking smoking and lung disease. We are talking causation, not just correlation. Moreover, the more time you spend with video games, the more likely you are to develop anxious and depressed brains. The video game brain is about surviving. That same reptilian part of the brain, that fight or flight that is activated by social media, is also impacted here. It's fight or flight, but because the dopamine flow is so intense, it leads to brain burnout. So after 2 hours of playing, a process called neurofatigue begins to occur in which we begin to see the stress hormone cortisol being released. Our fight or flight system is activated and our brains go from tranquil to stressed, leading to burnout. And this is exactly where you see that power struggle I referenced earlier regarding trying to take away a game from an active user. The brain is in burnout and cannot soothe itself to not react in an adaptive way. Now put this in context when you have a kid that wants to study or participate in a sport after gaming. They're doing so with a burnt out brain. So again, why is it addicting if it's so bad? Social psychologists have come up with the equation for behavioral addiction. It's competition, so think likes or winning, right? Plus socialization, comments, the kiddos on the headsets, which, by the way, the minute games went online, it became a whole different kind of addiction, equals addiction. Competition plus socialization equals addiction. So, are all video games born equally? Are all unhealthy? Not so much. So how do we quantify, an unhealthy video game? Two neuroscientists from UCLA, again, who wrote Digital Invasion, created the following list to help. You guys can take a picture of this if it's far enough, or at the end, come back up and I can give you a screenshot of it because I think it's really important. They did the research. They are much smarter than I, so might as well take advantage of it. But how do we quantify an unhealthy video game? 2 or more yes to these questions, the video game is considered unhealthy. Does the game involve characters that harm themselves? Killing themselves, punching? Yes or no? Does the harming occur more than once in 30 minutes? Is the harm rewarded? When you, for example, like when you harm, do you get points? Are there upgrades? Are there achievements? Do they get to do a little dance? Is the harm portrayed as humorous? Are nonviolent solutions absent or less fun? Something like hiding, right? Are realistic consequences of violence absent from the game? In Call of Duty, for example, you can get shot like 15 times without dying. I've never been shot, but my guess is my odds would not be as high. But think about this, right? Like, go old school, Tetris, Mario Brothers, Sonic. You could beat the whole game without a kill. And so right now, what does that look like? We're leaning a little bit more towards like a Minecraft, a Rocket League. Those don't answer yes to as many of these questions. So again, this is just a good reference of how do you quantify an unhealthy video game. I'm not here to say no video games because I think the kids in the other room would not like me. But how do we quantify an unhealthy video game? And the long-term research on looking at these unhealthy versus healthy video games, it's shown us a lot. We see a change of personality. One researcher said they go from Jesus to Judas. Their neural mapping is literally changing in their brain. We're seeing We're seeing teenage tantrums. They're throwing the controller, they're yelling, they're breaking TVs. And what we're seeing is there's a ring of fire in their brain, and it looks like a manic episode when you go through brain scans. It's really wild stuff. There's obviously a desensitization to violence. We're seeing it's similar to pornography. The risk-taking is rewarded with no consequence. There's an increase of violence of self, meaning self-mutilating, self-harm. We're also seeing a decreased personal motivation. There's a decreased just like ability to launch. We're seeing a huge failure to launch in our kiddos right now. And again, like I said, the boys specifically, they're really struggling to go from boyhood to manhood. We see a decreased need of connectedness. The in-person connections, the face-to-face, that limbic system that I talked about, it's just not being activated anymore. But that's where EQ, emotional quotient, IQ, intelligence, EQ, emotion, the in-person connections, the limbic system, the in-person face-to-face, that's where the EQ is developed. And because that is being so underdeveloped in our kids is why we're seeing insane levels of social anxiety right now. The EQ is completely underdeveloped. So why are we seeing this? Again, situation shapes disposition. Your situation dictates your disposition. For those of us who took intro to psychology in college, some might be familiar with what was called the Stanford experiment. It was a big time experiment, really unethical in today's world, but showed us a lot back then. And what the researcher went out and did is he got adult individuals that were measured as normative, healthy individuals, and he put them in a situation in which he divided them between prisoners or prison guards. And very quickly, they had to shut down the experiment because it showed that situation shapes disposition. The people who walked in as healthy, normal individuals literally started playing the part of prisoners or prison guard. There was abuse, there was violence, and so they shut it down, and now we have an ethics code around research. But my point is that it showed that our environment really has a very quick and severe effect on who we are, disposition. So your home is a situation from birth. This will shape their disposition, which is their temperament. So we are being called to create a situation, a home, that shapes the disposition, the temperament that we want. Otherwise, who our kids are associating with and interacting with online, that becomes their environment, and that's who they will become. God created us with what's called mirroring neurons, which means what I see, what my frontal lobe is looking at, is what I become, my personality. There is no more beautiful way to kind of realize how mirroring neurons work than looking at a crying infant baby, right? When that crying baby is crying, mom or dad or caretaker usually will pick up the baby, right? And they kind of coo, and I saw that. Totally kidding. But right, we usually try and pick up the baby and we coo and we smile. And if we're lucky, right, the baby starts to mirror our face. It starts cooing, it starts smiling. Those mirroring neurons don't stop after infancy. Those mirroring neurons are still very much alive for all of us right now, but especially our kids and our teens, right? And so those mirroring neurons, they're gonna start mirroring what they're seeing on that screen. And so usually when I give this talk, there's a lot of fear and guilt at this point. So I will, again, repeat, no, it's not too late, and no, you didn't ruin your children. You are not doomed for addiction and distress. Progress requires unlearning, meaning for us to progress, for there to be progress in our lives and in our kids' life, we have to ask, what do we need to unlearn? When I am stressed, I go on Instagram. When the kids are distressed, I give them the iPad. Parenting is just one big behavioral experiment. One time does not kill. There are opportunities for grace and for movement. It is the continual patterns and effects that do the damage. So a small little anecdote is that the way Eskimos kill a wolf, it's really interesting. They take a knife and they put it in seal blood, and they stick it in the middle of the land, and all the Eskimos disperse and kind of watch. And what the wolf does is the wolf comes and he licks the knife, right? He tastes that seal blood, and it's delicious. So he licks it, and he licks it, and he licks it. And by the time it gets to the blade, his tongue is numb. So he cuts his own tongue and he bleeds out. Screens are the same. We start licking the popsicle and it tastes good, and slowly we get to numbness, and then it's too late. We're numb to the violence, to the pain, to the sex, to the validation. So what do? We connect and we protect. This isn't a matter of privacy, but a matter of protection. If I had $1 for every time I had to say that to one of my clients. This isn't a matter of privacy, but a matter of protection. Abstinence is no longer an option. You really can't get through school, through work right now, without screens being implemented into our children's lives. For better or for worse, abstinence isn't an option. But there are alternative options. We speak in the ideal, we counsel in the ideal, and we teach in the ideal. So I know these aren't always possible, but this is the ideal, which is what we're gonna go over. And I wanna start by saying these recommended screen limits, which are also in that guide that I mentioned at the beginning, these are all talking about blue screens, iPads, cell phones, computers, blue screens. This does not include television. It's a different way the brain absorbs the information. So just to be clear, we are talking blue screens. These are the recommended screen limits for children. I always let my clients know that these are set by the American Academy of Pediatrics. I didn't make them, don't get mad at me. I'm just here to share the information. So children ages 0 to 2, they say no screen time. Babies need all 5 senses to develop at this stage, and the digital screen only develops 2 of your 5 senses, right? The seeing and the hearing. So 0 to 2, if we can, no screen time. 3 to 5, 1 hour per day. This is the age of make-believe, pretend. They have no logic at this age, so they need to spend playtime with other children. 6 to 12, no more than 90 minutes. 13 to 19, 2 hours a day. Remember, 2 hours a day, and then we go into that process of neurofatigue. 13 to 19, 2 hours a day. Again, I understand that this might not be realistic. Our schools are incorporating computers in every classroom, like I said. These are guidelines, not rules. So I understand this might be difficult to navigate, but we want to get as close as this as possible while also being realistic. We need to choose to be crisis prevention and not crisis control. You can no longer be reactionary. You need to be forward thinking, and no, it's not too late. So again, connect and protect. How do we connect? We need to create an open and honest and healthy relationship around screens. We want to emphasize the concept of credibility. Not everything is true on the internet. People on the internet might not be who they appear to be, etc. Credibility really needs to be emphasized here. We want to start conversations regularly about online safety. It's not, here's your phone for your birthday, don't do these things, and away we go. This is a regular conversation we need to check in on. We want to be transparent about the protections you're setting up. It doesn't have to be a secret. That we're teaching them cause and effect thinking. It's bigger than the screen at that point. Be transparent. Have the conversations. We also want to protect, right? We connect through conversation and then we protect. And I would encourage you guys to answer this with your family, with your partner, with your spouse, whoever's taking care of your kid with you, what that support person looks like. A major step in protection is to answer the questions on screen today. What devices do you want your children to have? Smartphone, dumb phone? I love the dumb phone. Smartphone, dumb phone, iPad, computer, tablet. What devices do you want your children to have? What do you want them to use it for? Is it homework? Is it looking up YouTube? Is it studying? Is it socializing? Is it having a FaceTime with grandma and grandpa? What do you want them to use it for? Where are your no screens times and areas? This one is huge. We have to have no screen areas and times. Spoiler alert, the bathroom is a no screen area, no question about it. The phone never needs to go in the bathroom. I don't care if they need to listen to music, find a radio, if they still exist. But no screens in the bathroom, just never. I would argue no screens in the bedroom. I know that's a bigger fight, but as a family, where are your no screens times and areas? Dinner table, I think, is a tremendous one as well. Times, a lot of times people have curfew, or again, if we're spending time as a family, that's a no screen time. Not my decision to make, your guys' decision as a family to answer this question. Another really important one is where is the nighttime family charging center? Those phones need to be checked in at night, and we have a family charging center. Another spoiler alert, the charging center is not in the kitchen downstairs when mom and dad's room is upstairs. Those kiddos will literally go at 2 a.m. and they bless confidentiality because they tell me a lot of things, but they are in the kitchen scrolling. So that nighttime family charging center shouldn't be in a place like the kitchen or the living room. Put them on Do Not Disturb and have them in your guys' room or bathroom. Just obviously get your own sleep, and you don't want that buzzing all night, but not a place that they can easily access it. Another thing I want to say here is be aware of how other parents monitor at their houses. No judgment, just be aware of it. Sleepovers are a huge trigger to maladaptive behaviors. So just be aware of that. And again, there's no right way, but develop a system that works in your home to protect your kids. I kind of was joking when I said the dumb phone thing, but I always encourage parents to make a smartphone a dumb phone. Go to that parenting guide that I provided you. It tells you how to get that stuff off. They don't need an app store. They don't need Safari. You can actually take those things off. Make a smartphone a dumb phone. Delay their access as much as possible. Follow their accounts. That's a huge one. Again, it's not about privacy. It's about protection. Follow their accounts. Another great suggestion is to create family accounts versus individual accounts. Everyone has access, and they might think twice if we're, posting this on the Cooper family account versus just Kaysee Cooper's account. So again, we've seen some success in creating family accounts versus individual accounts. Something to think about. Allow social media on large screens only. iPads, TVs even now, smart TVs, right? iPads, TVs, computers, the screen's bigger, they're not so quick to hide things. So allow social media on large screens only. Set time limits and please enforce them. And if your kid knows the password to your phone, they know the password to screen time. So try and change that too. Please set time limits and enforce them. Plan face-to-face time for them and their friends. That's just a huge one. Have them check in their phones with you. If they have a friend over, there's no need for the phone if they have a person. And again, plan non-technology family time. We actually have contracts in that parenting guide. There's examples in the appendix of contracts as a family you can create and everyone signs and agrees. Let's relate and connect about this topic of screens. So plan that non-technology family time. So that is the part of the practical. And again, your parent guide will give you so many specifics on that. But also let's look at the principle of all of this as parents. It's a 3-step principle. We want to model, we want to mentor, and we want to send a message. We want to model healthy bonding and boundaries. Again, I don't expect perfection here. I have 3 screens right in front of me. So how do you show up with your screens as parents? Are you taking calls at the dinner table? Are you listening to your kids and scrolling on Facebook? Are you zoned out of the family TV show, screening your own phone? Clients have literally shared with me that when they get home from school, They're disappointed to be greeted by their parent in her Facebook. They are, again, those are those mirroring neurons that I talked about. They're mirroring. So we have to ask ourselves, what do our boundaries with our phones look like? Mentor. This is the connecting and the coaching. When you decide it's time, interact with them. Coach them through the more difficult aspects of the phone. Their brains are not developed enough to fully process and understand the gadget that they carry around. When children are 16 years old, do we just hand them the keys to a car and say, good luck? No, we're terrified, right? And oftentimes, parents spend hours researching the safest care with the most credibility. Professionals literally have to train our children behind the wheel, and then the children are then supposed to log a certain amount of hours practicing with their parents. There's a system of support implemented due to the child needing to learn and understand the dangers of the road. I would argue that these devices can be just as dangerous, if not even more so, than a motor vehicle. However, a support system of training is not anywhere inherent. So I want you guys to think about this. I use the acronym THINK, T-H-I-N-K, think for when it's time to engage. Have them ask these questions before they post, before they comment, before they tweet, snap, TikTok, etc. Think, is it T is for true? Is it true? Is it helpful? Inspiring, necessary, and kind. Go through the acronym THINK. True, helpful, inspiring, necessary, and kind. And lastly, we have to send the message. The worth comes from what God says about them. We have to idolize God and not the influencers. To live a full life, we need to seek to follow God rather than seek to gain followers. I will again close in the scripture of in John, do not love the world or anything in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For what the world values, social media and video games, right here, the lust for constant pleasure, the greed for more things, and the prideful positioning to appear important. None of these things come from your Father. The world and what it values is going to pass away. But whoever does the will of God will live forever. So I think we have 10-ish minutes, if I'm correct, before the kiddos come back. And so I would make room for questions if I'm allowed to. And like I said, there's just so much content here. I cannot cover it all. So again, I really want to redirect you back to that website, theresetgroup.com. You'll find a podcast there. You'll find resources there, a weekly blog. There's workshops, there's workbooks, there's merch, there's so much. But there's a lot for free to download. But that parenting guide to screen, please download it, please use it, please start the conversation. Thank you so much for your guys' attention and just attendance here. And again, if anyone has any questions, please ask, and I'd be happy. Yes, in the back. Yes. Oh, thank you so much.
Wow. And I guess the other thing to add to that, do you have a YouTube that you've done of this yet that I can reference to other parents or other people or something I can listen to?
You're amazing. You can be on my marketing team if you want. Oh.
So the question I have for you,
Yeah.
in the Wall Street Journal about a week ago, it was talking that there's kind of been like things for the taxes. And so fortunately, my granddaughters are going to a hybrid homeschool.
Okay.
And 2 days a week they're there. There's no electronics. Okay.
Beautiful.
Already that's been taken care of. But where I worry about is a few years, 4 or 5 years from now, the oldest one's going to get there, is when they're going to move into the peer group, which would be like in high school. And so is that something that you see taking that step back away from the education's gonna be what they want. It's just that I don't know if these new ones have texting or anything like that. So I know that's fairly new, fad maybe or something like that. I don't know if you've heard about that, or if that's something that you offer to parents to say, get them off of this addiction, or they're gonna have the peer group pressure.
Yeah.
Every kid you watch that's a teenager has got a phone, they're just sitting there scrolling.
Oh, yeah.
What do you suggest at that most vulnerable age, say 13, 14?
Okay, I'm going to repeat and paraphrase your question because I believe this is being recorded so that people who are watching can hopefully hear this part. So the question was, it got brought up in the Wall Street Journal that it looks like there might be a movement to go towards back to flip phones. And in the most vulnerable ages of our children, when they are kind of getting that peer pressure to get a phone, and as parents, we kind of want our kids sometimes to have a phone, right? It's convenient for you guys too. And so if I'm understanding the question correctly, are you asking, do I think if there's a movement going back to the flip phone, and or do I recommend that? Is that the accurate? Yes, and is it a viable? I mean, I'm probably not going to be popular among your kids when I give a talk like this, but I would say it is a viable option to be considered. Two ways you can do that is that, yes, like, believe it or not, AT&T, Verizon, all of these carriers still carry actual flip phones. And so it serves the purpose of, yes, they can connect to you and friends without the harmful data of how do I download all of these things. So I think it's a very healthy alternative, and I pray that the wave goes that way. It's hard because we're also going up against the school systems, which nothing against the school systems whatsoever. They do a work of God that I could never. They're amazing, amazing teachers and professors and administrative out there, but their education is wrapped up in these things. And so how to unravel that connection is so difficult. I am going toe-to-toe with this school right now because I have a kiddo that she's a young one. She's addicted to screens. And all I've asked in her education plan is when she goes out to recess, she has a brain, a beautiful and brilliant brain, and she does have the diagnosis of ADHD, and that brain type is just so brilliant when directed in the right direction. And all I've asked in her education plan is please take the iPad when she's supposed to go to recess or lunch. There's no reason for that iPad to be out there, and they won't do it. But I really pray that happens, because that time is where she can use her limbic system, her relational system. And so it's hard to answer your question to completely untie these kiddos from these screens, because some of it's out of our control. But if you do have options, I will always vote that the most simplest really is the most effective in this case. So if we can get them back to the flip phones, or if they need to aesthetically be super cool and have the iPhone, we need to operate it in a way that we're taking the App Store off, we're taking Safari off, and that actually works as well. Did that answer your question? Okay. Thank you, and thank you for your kind words. That was very kind. Yes?
Is there any data on when kids get together physically to play video games?
There is a lot of data on that, and the short story of that is that, again, if you were to hook these little brains up to a monitor, they're getting a little bit of the limbic system, the relational, but for the most part, they're connecting through violence at one hand, but also they're not really connecting with each other. They're connecting with the game through each other, if that makes sense. And so even though, yeah, we're all together and like it's not actually developing the relational skills the way the brain experiences it. Yes.
I have 2 questions.
Go for it.
My first question is, do you, I don't know if this is science, but I think that some people have more addictive tendencies than other people.
Correct. Yes.
So, and then I guess, so I guess what I'm getting at is, you know, the environment can be a really big problem to some people, but not necessarily to others.
Correct.
Okay. So then the other question I had was, so a lot of this presentation was based on limiting screen time. So what is your kind of viewpoint on if we were to limit the screen, let's say a child's going through, I don't know, like those numbers, 7 hours or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Screen time a day, right? So
Okay.
So now we got 5 hours to it.
Yes.
So, do you have a viewpoint on what are good, things to replace it with? Obviously, you mentioned family time and stuff like that. Like I think things like puzzles, or even sometimes I think video games are a good thing to keep the mind, stimulated to problem solve or whatever, that type of thing. So, like, what are some good replacements that you
Totally. And I'll repeat the question. There was a little question, I think, kind of about some people are a little bit maybe more sensitive to environment or just prone to addiction than others. You're really bringing up the whole idea, which is a great topic of nature versus nurture, right? Some of us are just wired differently and might be more susceptible to some of that. The other part of that question was asked is that, okay, so if they're on the screen for 7 hours and we break it down to 2, what do we do with the extra 5, right? And so that's a big hole to fill. There's a lot, I would go to like athletics, the arts, like those are always great for the brain. And you said something like puzzles. That's awesome too. And then you did say sometimes video games can also be stimulating to the mind. Totally. Like we said, not all video games are created equal. So we want to look at the quality of the game and the quantity of time spent. With that being said, how to fill those other 5 hours is, yes, you'll have to get creative in today's world. But like, I'm talking like, can they go outside? If these kids could spend an hour outside more than what they're doing right now, that's a huge win. We're just not seeing kids outside anymore. Can they go outside? Can they be in sports? Can they read? Can they draw? Can they do puzzles? How are we stimulating the brain in a way that's actually leaning towards development versus deterioration is really gonna be the goal there. But it's, I hate to be funny, but it's almost like going back, like, what did we do growing up, right? Like asking ourselves those questions, and it might not be cool or savvy to a 13-year-old, but when they're 33, their brains will thank you, right? So it's just finding other ways to stimulate the brain. And what's hard right now in our society is that these things work beautifully and brilliantly, and they're so stimulating that at the beginning, coloring and doing a puzzle is not going to be cool, and it's not going to be as stimulating, but we have to like recreate their tolerance to stimulation, if that makes sense. They're not supposed to be as stimulated as these screens actually give them to them. Does that make sense?
there was one other thing.
Yeah.
Even back in the day when we were kids, I think a lot of the stuff that when we were kids, I think some of those things you can say that we were maybe addicted.
Totally.
Somewhat like playing a musical instrument.
Yes.
Or some of the highest athletes, they're kind of addicted to.
Oh, 100%.
So, I agree with a lot of what you presented, and but I think also there is the individual. Some people, it's how that person channels their energy or whatever.
Totally. And you're totally right. There is a lot of athletes that suffer from that.
This amount of judgment that has to go on with it to make sure that they can handle it.
Totally. And I also think it's going to come down to boundaries. And we talk about professional athletes, even they're addicted to their sport. And it's not healthy. I can name a quarterback or two if you're interested. But totally kidding. But it's not. But it's like, how do we have boundaries, whether it's screens or whether it's sport or whether it's food or whether it's exercise, right? Anything is going to be or can be addictive in that way. What we have to implement is boundaries. Boundaries is actually a really great book by Henry Cloud and John Townsend. For those of you who haven't read it, it's a faith-based book called Boundaries. I would Amazon Prime it because it talks about how to develop boundaries in different relationships, but also with different things, even including your faith. So boundaries would be my answer to that. And yes, you bring up the argument of nature versus nurture. Some of us, like we said, like the ADHD type brain, and if we have addiction in our family, even if we have family members addicted to substance, we are more predisposed to even have a behavioral addiction as well. So boundaries is my biggest answer to that. You're welcome. I think we're kind of wrapping up. Thank you guys so much for your time and attention. I appreciate you all. You guys are very kind. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kaysee. We really appreciate. We're so grateful you were able to make it today. So thank you so much. Hopefully, this was a source of encouragement for you all, for all of us parents. I know it's going to be really difficult going into the summer, but even the long term and the long view goal as they get into teenage years. If some of you have teenagers, it's not easy. So, okay. So thank you so much. Have a beautiful afternoon, and we'll see you next time on Wednesday. Thank you.